Welcome back to our special coverage of this Super Tuesday.
A very busy night, but it has flown by as President Biden and former President Trump racked up a pile of, well, expected wins as we've been kind of playing a broken record around here. Joining us now is Rich Rubino. He's an independent political analyst, and he's penned 5 political books. The most recent one, The Great American Political Trivia Challenge. Rich, we look at questions in that book all the time. Thank you so much for that. Tell me your takeaways from tonight and what's next as we move forward.
Well, I'm trying to find something that's interesting, something that's out of the ordinary. The obvious answer on the Republican side is how well Nikki Haley did in the state of Vermont. I thought the fact that figured going to Super Tuesday of all the states you could have campaigned, and the fact that she actually made a speech in South Burlington, Vermont, showed that she wanted a victory somewhere other than District of Columbia, and it's a very close call in Vermont. The other one, and this always tends to surprise us, is the American Samoa vote. If you remember last time, Michael Bloomberg, with all the money he spent, he lost everywhere, but he won American Samoa, in part because he actually had 4 paid staffers. Well, this time around, Joe Biden pretty much wiped the floor with Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson and all the other Democratic candidates everywhere except for America Samoa, where a candidate that very few people have heard of named Jason Palmer actually won the American Samoan caucuses. So he will always be in history. This will be the only time, probably the only primary caucus that Joe Biden won. So I was looking back in history. 1996, Bill Clinton lost the North Dakota primary because he couldn't get his name on the ballot. And before that, you have to go all the way back to 1980 when Jimmy Carter lost a few races, about 11 that is, beginning with Massachusetts, to Massachusetts Senator Ted Kennedy. So Jason Palmer's name will be in the history books. Usually in a Super Tuesday, it's about who's winning how many states, and it's a very close call. This time around, we're looking at the fact of what state did Nikki Haley win, and why is American Samoa does not go the way of America in some of these voting patterns.
Rich, campaigns are usually about positions, policies, platforms. Do we know what the Republican policy and platform is going into this election now that we seem to be making that pivot to the general election?
Yes, I think we do, and it's certainly not a monolith, and you're seeing that by the fact that Nikki Haley is getting 40% of the vote in places like Massachusetts, Vermont. But basically, it is no longer, it's not the Republican Party. From Eisenhower in 50, I always say this, from Eisenhower's win in 1952 to Romney's win in 2012, it was a party of free trade, foreign intervention, and generally liberalized immigration law. Now it is a party of generally that's more incredulous or skeptical toward foreign intervention. It's a party that favors economic nationalism, and it's a party that wants to restrict not only illegal immigration, but legal immigration as well. It's really become the Republican Party of really, if you go back to Harding in 1920, he actually used that slogan, America First. Harding and Coolidge, the Republican Party is now, where Donald Trump is now emblematic of that wing of the Republican Party. Now, there's still other establishment wings of the Republican Party. You see with Mitch McConnell, you see with Nikki Haley. The issue is going to be, since it appears Donald Trump, barring a cataclysm, will be the nominee, by 2028, there's going to be another civil war in the Republican Party. Presumably, whoever Donald Trump's running mate is going to be will seek the presidency himself that year. And there are going to be other candidates who are going to try to bring the political party, the Republican Party, back to where it was prior to Donald Trump. And then we'll see the real test, how much of an imprimatur has Donald Trump had on the history of the Republican Party. It's fascinating when you hear the term rhino, because people like Donald Trump would have been called the rhino 10, 15 years ago. Now they're the ones that are calling the establishment candidate, the establishment of the Republican Party, kind of rhino. So it's very much in reverse.
Yeah, changing some definitions there. Rich, I'm wondering if you're seeing, aside from American Samoa and Jason Palmer's win there, are you seeing any other weaknesses or evidence of weaknesses for Biden in tonight's numbers?
For Biden, not so much. They saw it a little bit in Donald Trump, just the fact that Donald Trump has showed he does not have a monolithic support. Biden's actually doing surprisingly well. For a president who has job approval rating well under 50%, he should be having a major primary challenger. Just historically, look, 1976, Ford had Reagan. 1980, Jimmy Carter had Jerry Brown and Ted Kennedy. 1992, George H.W. Bush had Pat Buchanan. And they all had job approval ratings well under 50%. This time around, despite Biden having under 50% job approval rating, he has very minor primary challengers. And the one test would have probably been New Hampshire, where Dean Phillips put up a lot of money, spent a lot of time campaigning, and he won less than 20% of the vote. So Joe Biden is doing very good in this primary outside of American Samoa.
Rich, kind of which came first, the chicken or the egg question, but is Donald Trump MAGA, or did he tap into an anger that was already out there and basically they are now leading the charge and he is simply the face and voice of that movement?
Oh, he tapped into it, and this is what's interesting because it's not something I don't think he believed for a long period of time. But in 1992, George H.W. Bush was president, and George H.W. Bush prepared an interventionist foreign policy and was in favor of NAFTA, for example, and had supported the Reagan administration's amnesty plan when he was vice president back in 1986. So Pat Buchanan runs against him that year, and Pat Buchanan talks about putting America first. He literally used that slogan in his campaign. He does relatively well in New Hampshire, then his campaign largely fizzles out. But the people that were supporting him were that branch of the conservatism. 1996, he runs again, and he actually beats the establishment candidate Bob Dole, as well as Phil Gramm and Steve Forbes and everybody else in the state of New Hampshire. Pat Buchanan won, then it came down to South Carolina. The establishment all came together, and they supported Bob Dole. He eventually becomes the nominee. Now, Donald Trump was never part of the Pat Buchanan movement. In fact, he was very critical of Pat Buchanan. He used to, at one point in 2000, the two of them actually came to a head. Remember Ross Perot's Reform Party? Well, in 2000, Ross Perot was not running for the Reform Party nomination. Donald Trump seriously considered it. Jesse Ventura, the former governor of, at the time, the governor of Minnesota, wanted him to run. He seriously considered it as a centrist, but he was very critical at the time of Pat Buchanan, called him an Adolf Hitler lover. Later, when he was thinking of running for president himself in 2016, one of the first things he did, he called that Pat Buchanan, and he apologized to Pat Buchanan. And he is now essentially, it's a legacy that went for Buchanan, and then Donald Trump now holds it. How much of it he really believes, I don't know. The one thing I do think he believes in, if you go to any speech going back to the 80s, any of his Oprah appearances, one thing he does believe in, protective tariffs.
Failure to heed history's warnings. Political analyst, author, and historian Rich Rubino. Rich, as always, thanks for being with us tonight.